Welcome to Let's Race, a journey to educate and eradicate, a teen-produced podcast aiming to educate about the role and impact of race in the United States, with the goal of eradicating systemic racism one step at a time. Each week, I'll be joined by experts specializing in topics concerning race, and they'll share their wisdom on how we can make a change in our community. My name is Elizabeth Choi, and I will be your host for this podcast. In today's episode, I will be joined by Dr. Marie Nubia-Feliciano, who will discuss her experiences in ethnic studies and advocacy for race education. Dr. Nubia-Feliciano has a Ph.D. in education, a master's degree in counseling, and a bachelor's degree in social sciences. She previously taught at Cal State Long Beach as a part of their ethnic studies initiative and currently lectures at Cal State Fullerton, in addition to teaching part-time for UC Irvine and Chapman University. Her topics of instruction include leadership, ethics, feminisms of color, race and ethnicity, ethnic studies, and identity. Dr. Nubia-Feliciano is also the founder and CEO of the Colegas Group, a consulting company that provides academic and professional opportunities for scholars. I'm so excited to have you here today, Dr. Nubia-Feliciano, and I look forward to hearing all you have to say.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic.
I thought I'd begin by asking, as a strong advocate for education, especially regarding race and ethnicity, what inspired your commitment to these subjects?
Well, my experience in education is really what inspired my advocacy for the field and specifically race and ethnicity. And it's connected to my own lived experience as a Black Puerto Rican person. When I first came here from Puerto Rico, I didn't speak any English. While working with my ESL teacher, it's English, English as a second language at the time. Now it's called English Language Learner. It was clear that I was at or above grade level because I was taught at home by my grandmother. So I knew my multiplication tables to 12. I can cursive write. I knew the colors and the alphabet, but most of that in Spanish. So all I needed was really help learning English, and I would be fine. Being a Black Puerto Rican in Southern California, who I was as a person, this little body, it was hard for people to really understand because it's like, why doesn't this Black person speak English? I mean, don't all Black people only speak English? Why doesn't he speak English? So I was really an oddity to my peers. So I came here when I was in the first grade. And so first, second, third grade, I was still like this sort of like, why isn't this Black girl talking English? And after a while, as you emerge into English speaking, your comprehension comes online first. So you kind of understand what people are saying, right? And you don't quite yet have the practice of talking, but you know what they're saying about you. And I just said, well, then forget that. I'm just not going to, they're not being nice to me. Why would I talk to them? And so I didn't. I actually befriended a little Mexican girl. Her name is Marta. And she spoke Spanish. So she and I hung out. And we talked about people in Spanish. And so that really helped me find somebody else. So I wasn't by myself. And that gave me the opportunity to take my time to emerge as an English speaker. So being an oddity, I was, bullied and pushed around a lot. And so my friend Marta was the one sort of like saving grace and allowed me to have a friend to hang out with. And we were friends all the way through high school.
Oh, wow.
Kind of nice. Yeah. But my classroom teacher and my ESL teacher checked in on me during conferences to make sure that my learning wasn't suffering, but they didn't push me to speak English in the classroom until I felt I was ready. And so the conferences were really important for them to make sure that what was happening outside the classroom wasn't derailing my learning process. I was reaching the benchmarks and learning goals and all of that kind of stuff. It probably wasn't until like fourth or fifth grade, so late elementary school, when I felt comfortable enough to speak in class. And so school for me was a place where who I was supported by my teachers. And this was long before the whole professional development courses and culturally informed pedagogy was a real thing that teachers needed to learn and embrace and practice and do in their classrooms. They just saw me as a child who needed time to adjust to a new environment, especially an environment outside of class. And so they gave it to me. And all children deserve that kind of support and care when they go to school. And teachers need to see themselves as the ones who can provide this care for their students. And so that's where school has always been a place where I saw a lot of good. And I saw a place for me to continue to grow and learn. And so that's why I'm a huge advocate. It should be that space for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really wholesome story. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love the friendship that you talked about, and then how your ESL teacher really helped you get comfortable. And I think that's a great way that it's a really inspiring way to get into the field of education, all of that.
Mhm.
So, do you think that inspired you in terms of education just in general or in the ethnic and racial aspect?
Well, the one thing, because my mom brought 4 children and herself here as a widow uh, from Puerto Rico, and my family's actually from, I was born in Vieques and I grew up in Culebra, and those are the 2 smaller islands off the eastern coast of Puerto Rico. And so it's a very rural community, not a whole lot of running water or consistent electricity. And I know nothing about the big island of Puerto Rico. And so it took a lot to sort of pull us out of that environment and take us across the United States and to settle in Carson in South LA County. And so she made all of her children promise for us to pay her back for all that sacrifice and work is we pick one profession and we go to the top. Well, I was just like, I just like school, right? It's like, so what am I going to do at school? Because I really like it. I could stay here. How do I stay in school, right? And so, aside from the degree, which in education, the PhD or the EDD, so the doctorate of philosophy or the educational doctorate, are the top degrees that you can earn for education, and then professionally, you need to either a professorate or a director level. And so that's how I decided that, I'm going to pay my mother back for what she did to help us get here to have more opportunities. And so that's the other reason why I decided to stay in school. So very much an immigrant story.
Thank you for sharing that, though. I think that's
Yeah.
very wholesome.
Yeah.
And I think you've definitely paid your mother back.
I think so. Yeah. She
Yeah.
tells me it's like, you're doing great, Marie. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of touch on ethnic studies specifically in your work.
Mhm.
So, with that at the forefront of your work, what do you believe are the most important components for an informational and impactful ethnic studies curriculum?
I think for me, there are 2 really important things that then everything else can be built on top of. One of them, we need to be working with the same set of facts. It's very, very important. But from that, where all ideas are welcome, then we go through them, all of the ideas, and we determine which ones are valid in facts and research. And then after doing that level of interrogation, then we figure out which ideas we could use as learning tools. We all kind of feel some kind of way about the issue, about any issue, you just pick one. And so I welcome students to bring their background and what they use to inform those feelings and sentiment for all of us to explore. And that way, we're not dealing with opinion, because opinion isn't fact. There's no way to check it. It's just like, well, that's just how I believe. It's like, well, great. What am I supposed to do with that? I mean, I can't then take your opinion on as something that is a foundational piece for my opinions, because that can change. And then there goes the structure I built on top of the opinions you're giving me. So opinions are not facts. So that needs to be made really, really clear from the beginning. And then the next thing is that we're all racial cultural beings. There's nothing neutral about it. Black students, white students, Asian students, Native American students, Middle Eastern students, Jewish students, Muslim students, Christian students. You can go on and on and on at the different dimensions of who we are. There's nothing neutral, regular. I just, the last couple of years, I've learned this basic. It seems to be a thing now. Like basic or ordinary about any of us. And so none of us can be used as a standard for how a person can or must be. And the United States is exemplifying the way a multiracial, multilingual, multicultural society is putting itself together. It is not easy, and it can't be fast-tracked. It takes time. And so once we have that understanding, engaging with the curriculum now then has a focus and a purpose.
I know that you have a lot of experience with teaching ethnic studies, and then I think you also had some experience specifically with a high school curriculum, I believe, was it Long Beach? So can you talk a little bit about that? I was kind of curious as to how you approached incorporating that curriculum for the high school level.
My instruction from high school to college is really, it sits on human development. We're all humans developing, going through very predictable parts of our development as human beings where we hit certain points in growth, our brain development, change, shifts and changes. So all of these things have to also be kept in mind as I create a curriculum. So maybe the words have to change. Sorry, my cat is meowing. So the lecture and the content that I use has to be appropriate for where you are as a human being first. And then after that, I have to figure out where you are as a grade level. What prior academic knowledge do you have? Understanding where they are developmentally is important. And so then that allows me to pick and choose the kinds of material. So video is really important, classroom engagement, getting people up, moving around, writing on the board, clips, and then having small groups and then large groups, understanding how human beings best learn given where they are just developmentally. And so for the high school level, it allowed me to look at the curriculum that I developed for college students and change it so that it's more applicable to where the human beings are developmentally, and bridging curricula. For example, in the science curriculum, you have claim, evidence, reason. So I now use that framework when I have them write papers. So that is then reinforced across both courses and topics. So those types of things has allowed me to be a better teacher because now I'm actually teaching Introduction to Ethnic Studies at Irvine Valley College.
Oh, okay.
And I have rising 11th graders, so there'll be 11th graders in the fall, and 55-year-old people, and then everybody else in between. And so I have to really what's called differentiate my instructional approaches in the classroom to make sure that at some point, everybody's developmental location is seen and the learning captures them where they are and brings them to where I need them to be.
Yeah, I like your point about human development and adhering to where a student is in their lifetime. And I guess going further than just the high school level, a lot of students or a lot of people nowadays are advocating for educating people about race and ethnicity from a really early age. So why do you think it's important that students are introduced to those concepts?
I think mostly because, like I mentioned earlier, there's nothing neutral about who we are. And so once we learn who we are individually, we can then better understand who we are collectively. So knowing your story and practicing telling it to others and yourself provides you with memory, storytelling, and then you are then able to tell your version of your family story moving forward. And it also gives you a set of protocols or ways of doing things that then you could use to help understand other people. You're not just going in with 20 questions. It's so where are you from? Why did your hair do that? Why do you eat that? It's that works if you're 5 or 6 years old. I am totally okay with early elementary school students just rolling up on me and going, why does your hair look like that? Or why does your skin look different? Because they are seriously they're in reconnaissance mode. They're just looking for information to make sense of their world because they literally have only been on the planet 5 years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they need that space to do the questions and and sometimes questions out of context because it's just oh, I need to know this. I need to. And so what the motivation is. When you're 30, you're at work, let's just for instance, and somebody just goes up to you, leans over into your cubicle space or in your door frame and goes, so where's your family really from? Bruh, really?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. So we have to, the sooner we know how to tell our own story, then we know how to even, developmentally where we are professionally and just as growing human beings, we then can approach other people by sharing ourselves first, make it a comfortable and safe place for them to share themselves with us.
I think it's a really great approach. Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've had people just sort of oh, Elizabeth, and ask really inappropriate questions.
Yeah, so for a lot of students, curriculums prioritizing racial or ethnic studies, especially at the grade school level, aren't readily available. So how can these students approach educating themselves about race and ethnicity?
Yeah, it is really unfortunate that in some states, the teaching of ethnic studies is either discouraged
Hmm.
or like flat out illegal.
Yeah.
And this puts those students at a disadvantage in three ways, in my opinion, and a moral disadvantage, an educational disadvantage, and a material disadvantage, meaning like being able to find and keep work. So morally, you never get the chance to practice taking the time, understanding yourself and somebody else. You develop empathy and maybe at some point figure out where we are actually alike in the face of our differences, right?
Hmm.
We can't just jump to, oh, we're just all people. It's like, no, we're people in different ways. And we have to talk about that difference before we like, yeah, of course, we're all human beings. Clearly, that's what the biology tells us, right? But moving beyond that putting that aside, that we are human beings very differently in the world. And so we need to understand what the implications of that difference are. And then we can, helps us develop empathy. And so educationally, I think study shows that all students benefit from understanding concepts such as race and ethnicity and how they're interwoven into other subject areas like law, medicine, and environmental science. And so if you don't have that, you miss those. Those become huge blind spots and holes in your knowledge. And then materially, because if you are practiced in engaging with different kinds of people and maybe even speak another language, you are more of an asset to a company that either has an established global reach or is trying to create one. So if you happen to be in an area where ethnic studies is not prioritized in any ways, look for online courses. Like the community colleges, Irvine Valley College specifically, for example, provides the class that I teach in person online. 2 sections online, 1 section in person. See if your local library has any online modules or workshops or lectures or talks. Read stories about other people. I've written a blog post about my recommendations for the top 10 books to learn about ethnic studies. The organization called Learning for Justice. They also have a great website with a whole bunch of resources, both for individuals to educate themselves or for school districts to develop curriculum. Finally, there's an organization called Ethnic Studies Now, and they're more of an advocacy group, and they provide sort of like the status of ethnic studies across the nation, the different social movements, the legislations, the proposals at different school districts, and they're a good historical reservoir of the evolution of ethnic studies in the United States. And so all of these are really good resources for students to start looking around. Please don't start on social media. Please don't start there. Or trust anything without verifying it first, because you first have to develop a framework with which to determine how true or valid something is. Otherwise, you're just going to accept it.
Hmm.
And somebody will ask you, so where did you get that? Oh, I saw it online. It's like, okay, so how valid is that? Well, I saw it online. So once you get through high school, and especially when you go through college, my expectation of those who graduate from college is that they know how to create informed opinions. They know how to interrogate what they see and determine whether it's something that they're going to take on as the foundation of their knowledge. They're just not going to be walking factoids. It's like, oh, I know this. Oh, I know this. Oh, I know this, without having some framework to make sense of all those facts. That's a junior high school level function. And when you graduate from college, you should not be intellectually stunted in the 8th grade. There are a lot of different resources available. Again, community colleges are globally available for you to take classes. At least all of them in the state of California have ethnic studies classes going available because they're seeing themselves as, the first place many people go to begin their college career. In California, it's becoming a college graduation requirement to take an ethnic studies class. And so taking it at the community college is a really good place to go if you're not going to go right into the 4-year institution first. If it's online, then it's available to anyone around the world for relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, I think that graduation requirement is definitely really valuable for college students. I actually didn't hear about that until I read your bio. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I think it's great to learn that. And yeah, I think it's really valuable that they added it. So speaking of like school district, I think that you mentioned one of the organizations they work with advocacy. So I heard that you're currently on the Ethnic Studies Curriculum Advisory Committee for the Irvine Unified School District. And that happens to be the school district that I'm in currently. What would this program entail, and what are some of your goals for this curriculum?
My involvement in the Ethnic Studies Curriculum Advisory Committee is really as a parent. I always center and I always have in the front of my mind the experiences of my children in the classroom because they are also going through the Irvine Unified School District. And so I think of them when I speak with a teacher or even a prospective teacher to determine if they are worthy to be my child's teacher. I measure the quality of the curriculum to see if it's worthy of my children's learning experience. Because you all have one time through in the 4th grade, one time through in the 11th grade. There's no, hopefully, repeating a grade. Right? And so the teachers have to get it right the first time through. And so I look for the quality of the curriculum and the quality of the teacher that will bring that curriculum to life. And so I have very high expectations for my own chosen profession. And so I insist that those who go into it are highly committed and qualified. And so with that, as a group, the committee we're working to create sort of like the broad contours, the frames of what the curriculum will look like, the ethnic studies curriculum for this district. It's moving rather slowly in comparison to other districts who took the initiative before or immediately following the death of George Floyd in 2020. And so districts that I know of are Santa Ana and Garden Grove, Fullerton Joint Union, already have classes that the students are taking. There's no, let's talk about it. Because this is a really long, let's talk about it process here in Irvine Unified. And I'm thinking, wow, what are you afraid of? And so I think in Irvine is slowly coming to terms with the demographic of the city. It's an immigrant English learner, both for parents and their students, rather high income and test focused. And so all of those factors require the district to sort of figure out how to frame the ethnic studies courses, because a lot of the feedback from parents is, what AP class can my child not take since they have to take this curriculum? The other factor will be teacher buy-in. From the meetings, it's clear there's a generational divide among the teachers. The millennial teachers are like, let's go. I want to learn what this is. I want to take this class so I know how I'm going to bring this to life for my students, because I need to know what I'm dealing with before I know what to do with it, because there's always focus on methods instead of really living the content. And the millennial teachers are like, I want to take this class because I want to know what it's about before I can actually teach it. Like, that's super smart. Beyond the millennials, older, there's an apprehension. It's just like, oh my goodness, another requirement that we will have to do. There's very clear generational divide. So the professional staff needs to do some work on those issues, because there is no going back to the way things were. Being a learner is hard. And I think sometimes teachers forget that part of education. As a profession, if you work in education, you always have to remind yourself what it's like to be a learner, because that's the process you're putting your students through. It's hard to learn something new. It's very frustrating. You get stuck. You blame yourself. You call yourself stupid. I'm not capable. I'm not worthy. And it just spirals, and it's like, I should just drop out of school. We can quickly just like crash, right? And we forget that as teachers. And so going back to school, not just necessarily professional development, but literally taking a class puts you in that space where you feel kind of angsty about something. It's like, well, I just don't agree, or I don't really get it. And then you receive the instruction from the teacher, and you essentially extend your hand to the hand that the teacher's extending to you, and you hold it in trust, and knowing that that person's going to safely walk you through that curriculum and help you understand the feelings that you're feeling and emerge as a capable, competent person, that you now have learned something new. It's hard being a student. Being a learner, it's hard. And oftentimes teachers forget that. From my observations in these meetings, I think that's where those who have been in teaching for 5 or more years, they don't want to get back into that learner mode. They want to remain in education what's called the more knowable other, the person that knows in that space and is guiding other people to them. You have to sometimes put yourself in that learner position so that you understand that it isn't just getting the material. There's a lot of emotional stuff that comes with that process. A lot of building up of the students, like, you can do it. And then you also can share with them. It's like, I took this class over the summer. It was a really hard class. And I felt really, really frustrated. So you can do a first person account. So it reassures the students. Just like, oh, so even my teacher struggles with learning something new. It's like, yeah, it's totally normal. So it isn't you. It's not like you're dumb or anything. It's a normal human process. And so I think those who have taught for a long time don't want to go back to that or don't see a need for it. But personally and professionally, I really think that teachers have to periodically go back into that learner condition so that they can remember what it's like to not know. And again, it's back to that empathy piece. Trust that the students are not, the nonverbals that we see in the classroom, you checking out or putting in your earbuds or, doing something else, is a sign that you've hit a wall and that you're disengaging and you're doing something else to mask the fact that you're lost. So then we have to come to you and go, tell me where you're stuck, or tell me where you are up to this point. Explain to me where you are to this point, and really bring the student back into the engagement of learning. But you only know that and can decipher the nonverbals if you remember that yourself. So I think that, the community piece and the teacher piece, I think, are the issues that are really, for Irvine specifically, are the challenges to really bring this curriculum to life. Because I think the kids really want it, because there's also kids and students in that, and they're all in it. They're even more excited than the millennial teachers. It's just like, why isn't this school already? So it's like, I know. And so one of the students I have in my class, the rising 11th grader, it's because Irvine Unified doesn't have it yet, and he wanted to take it. And so he's in my class.
Yeah. My school actually does have an ethnic studies class, and I think a few other classes, but then I feel like overall it's just very kind of unknown within the students, because I think especially at university high school, a lot of students are prioritizing like AP classes, like what you were saying. So I think that, yeah, it definitely would be valuable to have a really solid curriculum surrounding race and ethnicity. One of my friends told me that she took this class. I think it had to do with people of color in regards to like literature. But she said that her teacher, he's a white man, and he didn't feel very comfortable teaching the content because of his identity. So what's your take on, I guess, like the teachers who are capable of teaching the content? Is there any limits? And what's your take on that?
I think the current reality of teachers, the teaching profession right now, is that it's 70% white. And within that, it's over 70% female. And so given the overwhelming representation of white people in the teaching profession, they also have to do that self-work of seeing themselves as racial cultural beings. Once they do that work, then they'll have a place from which to help other students make meaning of the content, because then they have examples in their own life to contribute to the conversation. So a lot of teachers don't feel like they can teach, who are white, that an ethnic studies class, because they don't see themselves as ethnic beings. But that's not true. Of course they are. And they just have never, the system, the structures in the United States have never really put them in the position where knowing that about themselves will get them ahead. Just being who they are as white people gets them ahead. Where we as non-white folks are sort of placed in the position of knowing who we are, so that one, we can sort of have a place to build ourselves up when the world pushes us down, but also to be able to tell our story and integrate other worldviews into it as best as possible. So it's more work being who we are in this society, because we can't just be. Everybody's always asking us, When you look at if you ask the world, what does an American look like? It's usually a white person. That's what immediately pops to mind, because that's the imagery we send out to the world, whether it be in advertising or movies or entertainment or anything else. That's what the world sees. And so if that's not who we are, then we need to stop sending that image out into the world. And so the white majority in the teaching profession has to stop seeing themselves as neutral. We're just teachers. It's like, no, you are a white teacher. There is a racial cultural component to who you are and how you are in the classroom. And I think once enough teachers, that's why I think the millennial teachers, it's like, we're done being just basic. We're done not being asked to interrogate our past. They're done with that because they also have a story, because that's the impact on the white population when we consider them neutral. Those who have a story to tell are told to be quiet, and they're not allowed to share it because it's deemed not important. And it's like, it's a really important part of who I am. My immigrant family from Belgium, or my immigrant family from Germany, or my immigrant family from Spain. That's a whole part of who I am. And you're telling me it doesn't matter? And so they have to own that story now. And like I said, the majority millennial teachers are like, we have a story and I want to tell it. And so going through that process really then puts them in a position to be able to teach ethnic studies, because now they know how they are part of the conversation. And so that level of discomfort that one teacher had is because he doesn't know what his story is. And so he doesn't know how to contribute to the conversation. And therefore he doesn't know how to guide the students in their own emergence through their own story and through the curriculum. We are all racial cultural beings. And once we do the work that we need to do to know ourselves that way, anyone is able to teach ethnic studies.
I think that's a really great take. Yeah, like what you were saying, I know a lot of people, generally when they consider ethnic studies, they don't really consider the white identity prospect of that. And I think that what you were saying is, I think it would be really helpful, especially to white teachers who want to be part of the movement and who want to teach those kind of classes. So overall, how can communities and schools benefit from a fully integrated ethnic studies curriculum in both grade schools and universities?
I think one of the biggest benefits is that it just provides us with a way for us to acknowledge the visible difference between us. Those differences are 100% a part of who we are and contribute who we are as people and as individual cultural beings. Again, there's nothing neutral about us. There is nobody that is just a human. It's not true. It's not true. So ethnic studies gives us a blueprint to succeed in the 21st century. I know there's been some criticism about the ethnic studies curriculum, that it only focuses on 4 racial cultural groups: Black African Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and Chicano Latinos. But it's more of a case study in learning about thematically about those racial cultural groups, we develop protocols or ways of understanding that we can then use to learn about other groups. For example, when we got on the topic of land sovereignty and Native American identity and the history around reservations and contested land and all of that, one of the students in her final presentation, who was Palestinian, resonated with that struggle. And so she started with the Native American land sovereignty, land dispute concept, rose it out of that, and applied it to her family's struggle in Israel-Palestine. And it's like, that's it. That is exactly what one of the learning outcomes is. It's a case study. It isn't that we're excluding anyone or anything. It's that we're using these 4 racial cultural groups as case studies. And I also talk about the LGBT community that crosses all of those. When we talk about class, that impacts all of them. We talk about disability, that is present in all of them. We talk about the importance of spiritual or religious belief and practice, which is included in all of them. And so there are ways that other identity groups that are sort of arrange themselves in a different identity can look at these conversations, pull out the big ideas and apply it to themselves. Because that's the work of the student, right? We can't cover all history in a history class. We can't cover all of science. Like we can't start you in elementary school with the foundations, with all the knowledge you need. It's incremental. We start with certain concepts in math and we build on those. And then we build on those and we build on those as the grades go on. Same with ethnic studies. It can't be like, well, we need to talk about everybody. It's like, we can't do that in 16 weeks. We just can't. And so we start with some concepts and then we use some groups as case studies to examine those concepts. And then from there, you can then take an ethnic studies second level class specifically on a particular Asian American community, for instance, the history of the Filipinos in the United States and the Philippines, or within even the Middle Eastern identity and how that, the idea of Orientalism. Edward Said talks about that. So now we're talking about geopolitical identities and the centrality of Western Europe as the center and everything when you're looking at it, to our right is the East and everything to our left is the West. And so we can look at the concept of even Asian. So there's a lot of different, but you need that foundation. And that's what introduction to ethnic studies is. And so it gives us that. So again, it gives us a blueprint to succeed in the 21st century. So our students must be given those tools. And so efforts to take us back to some imaginary times where things were good. I don't know when that was, because if you study history, it's ebbs and flows, right? And so, we can't walk around being colorblind because it's fruitless. It's kind of delusional a little bit and kind of just plain ignorant, right? It just really is. It doesn't suit you. It's not useful to the next generation. It's like, don't see color. We're all people. Like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm getting from the 15 to 22-year-olds, that generation. They're like, that's wild. It makes no sense. So there is something about your current realities and what you see and how you're interpreting your world that you're understanding already what ethnic studies is about, and you're excited to learn more, as opposed to, I don't know about this. Is this just like everybody's got to hate everyone? It's like, where did you get that? Right? Or is this making people feel guilty? It's like, what? I mean, you really where's that coming from? So it doesn't make sense to me. And from the students that are, like I said, between like high school to college age now, that is one of the wildest interpretations. It's like, they would have never thought that ethnic studies is going to make people feel guilty or make people hate anybody. That's just like, why would you even go there? And so I don't know. I'm Gen X. It's just like, I don't even know. I don't understand my people at all. It's like, why do you jump to that? So that's between you and your therapist. I can't help you.
With what you mentioned, I think a lot of people tend to kind of assume that ethnic studies is just about learning about everyone in the world. And I think that one of the classes I took, AP US History, my teacher really prioritized conversations about identity. And rather than an ethnic studies class, I feel like that kind of followed the structure of what you were talking about, like relating our experiences to others, whether that's through race, LGBTQ, disability, and all of that. So I think that's definitely something that I really appreciated, and that definitely led to more my own identity development.
And that's really good. And you did, and you also reminded me of the fact that a lot of people are like, well, isn't ethnic studies just multicultural education? There is some overlap. The Venn diagram does overlap, but they are very distinct because for the most part, multicultural education is really the exploration of the other. So I learn about you, your history. It's kind of like checking a human being out, like a book, and reading about you and learning about your history and all of that. Ethnic studies forces me to start with me first and then go out to you and then come back to me. And it's a lot more psychosocial work to make meaning of facts and then integrate it and then grow as a person. It's a very different process, and it takes more time. And that's why it's important that teachers who are going to be teaching ethnic studies take the class first so that they can sense the shift, because it's palatable. There's frustration, there's angst. It's like, well, what about? It's like, good point. Let's talk about that. It brings up a lot of questions, and in a safe space, you can bring up questions. It's like, so is reverse racism a thing? It is not. I make that that is an irrefutable fact, right? Right along with Holocaust happened, the world is round, we went to the moon, right? These are like facts. Reverse racism is not a thing. And so but we can entertain those ideas, because like I began, you need a place to practice these, because the world of professional work, you're going to be working with so many different kinds of people. It's such a diverse work environment now, regardless of the profession, that you need to be comfortable with difference around you and understanding that your difference is impacting other people too. And so ethnic studies helps you do that. That's the 21st century. So the more practice you have in that, the better capable you will be. And then you won't say something stupid or do something stupid and lose your job all by yourself. You won't be able to blame like the minorities. You're the one that said something stupid. You're the one that's now against the cultural norms that we now have to live in, where difference is the norm, and we acknowledge the visible differences because they're a part of the genius that the person brings to the endeavor. If you are not comfortable with that, you need to get comfortable with it. And you guys are all ready to go with that. I just love it. That's why I love teaching college, because it's like, they're like ready.
Yeah, I really liked your differentiation between an ethnic studies class versus a multicultural class, and also the differentiation between learning about your own culture before delving into someone else's. And yeah, I think if this curriculum does get put into place, I'd really like to see that, especially for my brothers who are younger than me. Yeah. So I think that would be very valuable for them.
Yeah.
And yes, I kind of just wanted to close off with one last question. So what are some ways, just in general, that young adults can promote racial equity and create change in their own community?
In my mind, it's kind of simple. Know your own story. Own your own story. Know it and own it. Don't let anyone tell you that, for example, being South Asian, Indian, or Mexican and Japanese doesn't matter. It absolutely does. It's the only story you can tell. The only one. And that it's a story then you can pull apart and take aspects of it. Let's say you're applying for a job. You know your story very well. You take an aspect of it that applies to the job that you want, that you've applied for. So you wrap your story around that job and you bring it to life the only way you know how. And it will be distinct from anybody else's story. And you know what? Just answering that simple question, it's deceptively simple. It's like, so tell me a little bit about yourself, Elizabeth. Right? You then have to know your story, enough of it to tell it and relate it to the job. And you know what? They may not have any other questions for you. And they may hire you right on the spot, because you're a great storyteller and meaning maker. And you've helped them understand you and how you're going to bring that job to life. So knowing your story, don't let anybody tell you that it doesn't matter, because it 100% does. And it's the only story you can tell, and ethnic studies will help you figure out how to tell it. And when you do that, you know how then to collaborate with others. You are able to what's called see a linked fate in the struggles between groups of people, like that hashtag Asians for Black Lives. That was 100% understanding of the struggles of the Black community and how it is similar. It may not be the current reality of some Asian American communities, but it absolutely was the history of Asian Americans in the United States. There were acts, the Chinese Exclusion Act in the United States. There were legislative ways to exclude, to dehumanize Asian Americans and Asians in the United States. So seeing Black people struggle for an acknowledgement of their humanity, understanding that linked fate, because you know your story, allows you to see other people's story too. And so for me, it's foundational. Know your story and own it, and don't let anybody tell you it doesn't matter, because it's the foundation of activism, your professional growth and development, your moral growth and development, and your ability to create community and collaboration across racial cultural groups.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think that'll conclude our episode for today. So thank you for joining me
My
today.
pleasure, Elizabeth.
I really learned a lot. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you found it informative, be sure to follow us to stay updated with our weekly releases. Let's race again next time.